Hey, what's up guys? My name is Ren, and in this tutorial we're going to go about making some sweet rain effects in a video. And it's all about subtlety. It's all about making it really subtle, and that's what makes it most realistic. So let's go ahead and check out the video this effect was actually originally in. It was in one of my videos on my YouTube channel, Ren the Reaper. Let's watch it. Just first few seconds here.
It's Saturday.
As you can see, it really helps having the rain sound effects, and it was just here for about 2 seconds. It was just a 2-second shot in the video. And for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and this will be an 8-second shot, so we can actually see the rain droplets falling down and whatnot. If you ever have any questions about this, go ahead and hit me up on Twitter. That's probably the best place to find me to answer questions that you may have. But enough of that, let's go ahead and get into the effects. So here is the full-on effect. As you can see, we've got some rain droplets and some like fog mist going along and some rain, and just like an overall blunted, or blunted, is that a word? I don't know. Blunt look to the video. So let's go ahead and do this. The only thing you'll really need is particular, trap code particular, and I have a video file here, stock footage from Action Essentials of just like, you know, dust wave, and we can repurpose that to make it look like just fog above some rain. So let's go ahead and take our footage and start a new composition. As you can see, it starts out super punchy, and it was kind of ironic because I needed to film the rain. That was the whole point of the shot, but it had rained every day leading up to this day, and then when we finally needed it to rain, it wasn't raining at all. Fortunately, it had rained earlier that day, so the ground was still very wet, and that's critical to making a realistic rain effect. If it hasn't been raining, hopefully you have a hose or access to a lot of water to get all the pavement in your shot wet, because that right there will sell the effect more than anything. So let's go ahead and take our footage, and we're going to camera track it over here, so I can get, there's not really much 3D motion, but in the end it'll be simpler for all the motion tracking that we're going to have to do, as opposed to using just the standard point tracker and then parenting everything to a null. This will be way easier. So I'm going to duplicate it first and take our bottom layer and just hit track camera. So that'll do that in the background. And on this top layer, while that's tracking in the background, let's go ahead and start editing the look a little bit. So we want it to be really muted in the highlights. Maybe bring up the midtones a little bit, maybe not that muted. And actually we're going to lift the shadow region here quite a bit. So we get like this overall just kind of really dingy look. Maybe actually lift the true shadows up just slightly. Maybe that a little bit more. So we kind of get this dark look as opposed to this really punchy, sharp, daylight-looking shot. So this will just help kind of sell, you know, that it's cloudy out. Let's see, is this still analyzing? It certainly is, just a little bit more. So another thing we can do is perhaps add a Control-Alt-Y, an adjustment layer. And we can add curves to that and just kind of mess around with this. But the point of adding the adjustment layer is that we're going to add a bit of a hue and a saturation curve thing, and we're just going to kind of actually colorize it. Get a good solid blue in there. Just kind of really get a good blue going. You could also use the tint effect for this, but I chose to use hue and saturation. I generally like the results more out of that, because then we can actually adjust the opacity of this. So just kind of add a bit more of a blue tint feel to the whole thing. And like I said, you can get kind of a similar effect using tint, but I prefer the look of hue and saturation. So with starting to get our look. And now if we can see our 3D camera tracker, it has indeed finished. So I'm just going to go ahead and create our camera, And now that our camera is created, we can delete this entire bottom file here. We don't need it anymore. We just needed the camera. And there's no point making null objects. I mean, there's no movement. Just stick it in the scene and that's it. So I'm going to do one more quick thing. I'm going to make an adjustment layer, Control-Alt-Y. I'm going to select this ellipse tool right here. I'm just going to kind of circle over this actress here. Her name is Jenna. Very wonderful girl. We've been dating for 3 years. But that's beside the point. And I'm just going to take curves and adjust it to that and just blow it out. So that's just to see, where our mask is actually being affected. So we can feather this out, something like that. And now we can reset our curves, just kind of, because she's the whole point of this shot here. If she's just completely out of the background, it's kind of a boring shot. You want to have someone in focus. I'm also going to add another hue and saturation here. Just kind of saturate it a little bit. That's actually quite a bit, but for the purpose of this shot. Sweet. So let's go ahead and make that a 3D layer, and as you can see, it moved a little bit. That was my fault for not making a 3D layer beforehand, but this is super easy just to get in place. So now, as you can see, it sticks to the frame the entire time because we tracked our camera. So let's go ahead and call this actress color. These names are completely arbitrary. Camera, and this is the blue CC. And we have our footage. So now you can already see we've got a pretty decent effect considering that this is what we started with. If we were to just do that, and then that, and then this. So we've got the basis of our shot. Let's go ahead and start with one more thing. Before we actually get right into using particular, we're going to make a solid, which will act as our ground plane here. So I'm going to hit Control-Y and make sure you make a white solid, although technically in the end, as you'll see, it won't really make a difference. But I'm just going to make a white solid here. I'm going to scale it up and make it a 3D layer. And let's go ahead and rotate this. So if you hold down the W key, you can temporarily, rotate it. So undo that. Hold down W and rotate it along the X-axis until it is completely flat. If you hold down Shift while you do this, it'll snap into place, making things way easier. You just want it flat here, and then I'm going to lower it. So if you get out of the rotation, just go ahead and hit V. It'll take you back to your pointer. Anyway, kind of rotate it till it's kind of in place down here. Anywhere generically right here is pretty good. Now I'm going to rotate it just a little bit on the Z-axis so it kind of lines up more with the sidewalk. Move it more into place. I'm actually going to move it back too. We could stretch this out. Stretch it out wide. And bear in mind, this is actually really huge at the moment, but that's not a big deal. So if you hit T on the keyboard and bring the opacity down to something like 20%, I'm going to select the pen tool, and I'm just going to literally outline the sidewalk here. It doesn't have to be too specific. As you can see, I'm just going to actually, if I cared just a little bit more, if this was like a non-tutorial, I would have gone and fixed that little thing there. Not the biggest of deals. As you can see, just outlining the sidewalk. Zoom out, and then the rest of it right there. Sweet. And I'm going to go ahead and add one more mask along all of these leaves. Because the point of this entire layer that we just made is it's going to react with particular. It's going to tell particular where the ground is, where the water droplets should be bouncing back from. And so I'm just kind of outlining everything that will be bounceable, if that's the right terminology for it. So if you hit MM on the keyboard, or rather MMM, it'll bring up your masks. The second one, go ahead and set that to subtract. So now we've got here. If you hit F, we'll be able to bring up our feathering tool. This one you can feather out quite a bit, and this other one you can feather out a little bit too. And as you can see, I still have my pen tool, hit V, back to pointer. So go ahead and select it, hit T, and bring the opacity back up to 100%. So here's a really sweet trick here that actually works really well. As you can see, it's stuck to the scene, but particular will only access the alpha values of this layer. It will not access the luma values, which is what we've created, because it's still not transparent technically, because the masks that we've applied are external to the layer. We have to bake that into the layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our white solid and hold down Control Shift C. And I'm using shortcuts because this is a premium tutorial. Hopefully you've got that much down. But basically I'm just pre-composing this. And we want to leave all the attributes. Normally you would move all the attributes to make it one solid composition here. But no, we want to leave everything here so we can access the original white solid in its non-3D moved state. So let's go ahead and label this floor. And if you double click on it, it'll take us to that composition, and you'll see, you know, nothing special, just a white layer. So if we go back to our preview, actually no, not the preview, that's what we don't want. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that. If we go back to our footage and hit M, select our masks, both of them, and actually we're going to cut them out of here. We're going to literally copy them, then delete them. So Control X. So now they're gone, right? So we go back to our floor layer, select our white solid, and Control V to paste. And now we've pasted our mask back into the thing. So if we go back to our footage, you'll see that now those masks are inside of our composition here. So now where it's actually cut out here, it's actually, you know, transparent, legitimately, like you can go through it. Have you followed so far? So now it's the time has come to actually set up the rain. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Y again, and I'm just going to go ahead and make this like a red layer. Completely arbitrary, doesn't matter at all. And I'm going to type in particular, double click on that. So now we have our particular layer. So first thing we want to do is we want to set it to be a directional particle system. And what that just means is that we actually see directionally where the particles are moving, as opposed to in just any direction. So now if we actually, you know, move our rotation here, we can see where it's going. So let's go ahead and set this to like a -90, which is straight down. So now the particles go out and it's straight down. Another fantastic thing that I learned way too late when I originally did this video is that if you just use the track camera thing and actually create a camera, the particles will actually move in place with the camera. And what I did originally was I just used the point tracker and linked the entire solid to that null object. And I ran into issues with that because along the edges here, the particles won't render on the other side of the end of this layer. So anyway, let's go ahead and set this type of emitter to a box. And that way, instead of just all the points coming out of a, or rather all the particles coming out of a single point, it'll come out of a grid-like structure. So let's go ahead and set the spread down to something like 5. We don't need much spread. Set our Y rotation to something like this, so it'll seem like rain's coming down, although we're going to have massive gravity thrown in, so it won't make too much of a difference, but just a little bit of hectic like things. And our emitter size, we're going to make this ginormous, like 2500 on the side by something like 7000, not 700. Front and back, so that way you just get a lot of big particles close to you and a lot of small particles far away. And we're also going to make the Z thing huge. I was also going to make this something like 7000, and that just gives more variety to the speed and placement of some of the particles as they fall. And obviously we need a lot more than 100. Let's go ahead and make this also 7,000 particles. So now it looks like it's snowing. Not exactly the effect we're going for at all, but that's okay because we're going to fix that. Let's go ahead and change our velocity to 3,000. So now we have really fast moving snow. So these settings here we're not really going to touch at all. We'll just, change the randomness up to 50%, for instance. And this will pretty much be it. Maybe we can push this back a little bit, ever so slightly, but that's not the biggest of deals either. So now we're pretty much done messing with the emitter. Let's go on to the particle system, and we can go ahead and close that out. Actually, no, there's one very more important thing we got to do. Set our emitter up above, so it's coming from above the whole thing rather than within it. So now we can close that out. So particles, life, we instantly want to put this up to something like 10 seconds. We just want them to stick around for sure. Life random, no need to change that. Sphere feather, let's put that down to 0. We don't need no feather on that. Size, we want small particles, so let's put this down to like 1.2. Something really small. For the opacity, let's just drop this down to like 90%. And we'll pretty much just leave that there. I mean, not really too much going on with that. We'll just get some particles going on. We're going to add motion blur, which will actually make these particles look more like rain rather than snowflakes, but we'll get to that in a bit. Let's go ahead and change the color to a little bit of a bluish hue, bluish coloring to it, just to kind of blend with the bleak background. I did have it as white for a while, but I do prefer the bluish color better. And transfer mode, no, don't need to look at any of that. Shading, no, don't need to turn that on either. So the next thing we're going to look at is the physics. In the physics model, we want to change that to a bounce. So let's go ahead and set that to bounce. And gravity, let's jump that up to like 600 and, I don't know, 30, 50%, 630. So now we've got some extreme gravity going on. Physics timer, don't need to change that at all, but here's the important little thing, bounce. And this will open up our little sub menu for that. So our floor layer, this is what we just made out of this. Let's go ahead and select our floor layer. Instead of infinite plane, layer alpha. So now it will only interact with the white part of the layer here, because that's the alpha. It will, because if you just left it as infinite plane, it'll just use this entire layer and put it out in infinity in all directions. Which could work depending on your shot, but for this I wanted specific ground plane, so layer alpha. Don't need to look at these other ones. In fact, collision event, instead of having it bounce, kill. So basically that means as soon as these particles pass through this ground layer, they no longer exist. And we will actually trigger a second instant of particles every time a particle goes through that layer. So let's go ahead and X out of that. We don't need that anymore. We've already set up our plane here. The next thing we need is the auxiliary system, or the AUX, the AUX system. So this is automatically by default set to off. We select it and go to at bounce event. We get these little colorful fruity loops going on. So hey, what's going on with that? Set this up to like 35 particles. And if you may notice, got like these Christmas lights going on. What's the deal with that? Well, actually, if we take our velocity and increase that, you'll see we're actually getting these sweet particles coming from the ground. So now you can start seeing the basis of the splatter, the water splatter on the ground. I think that's pretty cool. Obviously, we're not there yet, so let's go ahead and go to our opacity and set that down to something like 7. And our color from main, set that to 100%. And now it'll actually look like our raindrops. So let's go ahead and turn off our floor. We actually don't need that to be on for this. And, if that looks good to you, good for you. Doesn't look good to me yet, so I'm still going to continue changing this. Feather, I'm going to actually put that up to 100%, so we get a nice, really feathered particle system going on. I'm going to set the life down to like 0.3 seconds. And the emit probability, 90%. So 9 out of 10 times the particle goes through the plane, it'll actually emit. All right, almost there. Not really too much more to do. Let's go ahead and change our opacity over life. So we want this to kind of like level out over time until it's down to nothing. And same thing with our size over life. And this is a pretty sweet graph here. You just kind of like edit where you want like stuff to be, and then just kind of edit down like this. And you'll also notice we get these really hot start location things here, and part of that has to do with the size of our particle. First off, way too big, 1.3. So now we're getting more of what we need here. Actually, well, unfortunately now we can't even see it. So let's go ahead and skip the rest of this and go straight to turning on motion blur so we can actually see what it is we're trying to make. And just turn it on. Hit opacity boost to 1. And doing a quick RAM preview. Starting to see the water droplets coming down and the rain. Getting the basis of our effect just right there. Still needs some work, but we can work on that. First off, it starts too late, and to offset that, you can just literally just drag the file over, and so it'll start emitting at the beginning of your layer. So if you drag that over so that it starts emitting earlier, your scene will start with it already raining, and then you can just drag that to the end and fill it up. So let's go ahead and go back up and change our speed, our velocity here. Let's put that to like 300. Kind of seeing it here. It's very, very subtle, which is very much so the point of this. Let me put that to 0.4. Size 1.5. 100%. Almost a little surprised it's not showing up more than that. Subframe sampling, put this to 50. So you can do that. You can play around with the different types of motion blur. I found this to be a little bit too harsh, and I think the color right now is still a little too blue even. Now I can't even really see the rain. So this is where experimentation comes in. So I prefer going back to just linear and just cranking up these settings. It's different every time with every shot. Just a matter of playing around with the settings so you get something you want. Maybe drop down the feather a bit. Increase the velocity, perhaps. Increase the number of particles. And that's another thing, because when you're just looking at a freeze frame, it's hard to tell, but when you see the whole thing in motion, it's quite a bit easier. Might be quicker if I just do a half resolution RAM preview. You'll notice that we've got these hot spots. And you may like that. I think it's a little bit too much of a dead giveaway that they're visual effects here. You kind of see them like this white spot, this white spot. And to go about fixing that, I found that if you just kind of like cut the edge off of the opacity and size, just like that, you get rid of a lot of that hotness. Just like that, yeah. So you still get the splatter without the intense starting particle system. And there we go. We're basically 90% of the way done with this effect. The only thing we have left to do is basically just adding the fog and making that blend better with the shot. Voila. See, that's actually looking kind of sweet. Another thing I noticed, I'm getting these really close raindrops, like this one right here. You may like that. I'm personally not the biggest fan, so even though we don't touch world transform or visibility at all for this effect, I'm going to go ahead and take out visibility and take the near vanish and just push that out to just a few hundred, just so I can kind of get rid of those closest things next to the camera. Because in my opinion, those ones that are really close really give away that it's CG. And there you go. Even so, that's probably just, that may not be subtle enough for me, but it doesn't matter. If we go back to our project, you'll see that I've got this dust wave. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out, and you'll see right away that this is not what we want it to be. So I'm going to kind of trim it about right here or so. Alt left bracket and go until here. Alt right bracket. So first off, I'm going to scale it. Something like that. And mess with the opacity. So opacity, drop that down. What would be a good opacity? Like 60% or so. From about right here, just kind of put it to 0. Oops. So it fades on. And as it fades out, when we get to about right here or so, I'm going to put that back up to 100 to just kind of offset its natural opacity drop. Actually, we may even make this lower to make that more apparent. So it's a much more even opacity of this thing. It doesn't fade away as quickly. And so then once we get to right here, we can just drop this down to 0. Sweet. So now we've got a clean fade in, hold, and then fade out. So now what we can do is we can duplicate this and drag this over. So we can drag this to here. So we start off with fade, and another one. That's maybe even a little too sharp. So we can take these and just duplicate them a few times. Just slide them over just a little bit. Slide it over just a little bit. Duplicate it a few more times. Just kind of keep doing this. And careful not to make it too obvious, because otherwise it'll seem like it's obviously repeating. But this is kind of the effect that you're kind of starting to get there. So let's go ahead and take all of these, and we're going to pre-compose these. All the dust waves. Control-Shift-C to pre-compose, and we'll call this fog. Open up our fog, and we want this to actually be larger. So I'm going to go to Composition Settings under that, and just drag this outwards until it encompasses our whole video. Just like that. Ooh la la. Go back to our footage. If we unsolo it, you can see it's in there. And if we make it a 3D layer, bam, don't even have to do anything, automatically tracked into our scene. Pretty sweet deal. We can move it around. So now what we want to do is drop the opacity of this quite a bit. Like, want it to be really subtle. Well, first let's leave it a little higher, and let's go to hue and saturation. And we're going to colorize it, another blue, and increase the saturation, drop the lightness a little bit. Now we can drop the opacity. And there you go. You got some fog on top of your rain. This is pretty much the final effect. That's all there is to it. It's all about subtlety. It's all about making sure that it's not too obvious that the shot is CG, because you'll be surprised what your brain can actually pick up on. So you just add little things like just a little bit of fog, just a little bit of raindrops bouncing up off the ground, just a little bit of the raindrops actually falling from the sky, and that'll be enough to make it seem like a raining shot. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this visual effects piece. Actually, now that I'm looking at this rain preview, I would say that it's still not subtle enough. I think the fog is way too visible. I would probably drop this down another, I don't know, drop it down to 40% or less. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or any of those things. Or even the comments thread of this tutorial webpage itself. I do read those from time to time and answer questions. So if you have any burning questions on how to do this, anything you didn't understand, feel free. Don't hesitate. All that good stuff. And yeah, my name is Ren. This is another great tutorial for Aetuts Plus. I say great. Maybe it was terrible for all I know, but I like to think it was pretty good. Yeah, Aetuts Plus. Great site. All right, that's enough for me. Take care. Later.